This Whoop alternative, the Amazfit Helio Strap, is doing surprisingly well in my testing. When I originally received it, I was very skeptical if this device that doesn't require a subscription could do possibly as well or even better than the Whoop strap. However, in some ways it's outperforming the Whoop strap, but in other ways it's not quite as good yet, and I'll show you that in this video. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Rob and I'm a postdoctoral scientist specializing in biological data analysis, and in this video we'll scientifically and systematically test the measurements taken by the Amazfit Helio Strap, both one worn on my biceps and one worn on my wrist, and we'll take a look at several things. We'll see how good the Amazfit Helio Strap is compared to the competition. We'll also check if it matters in some way if you wear it on your biceps or on your wrist, and we'll also dive a little bit into the app to see if it can compete with the Whoop strap, because there's two things you need for these kind of devices to be useful. First of all, their measurements need to be good, but second, the data also needs to be interpretable, and this is at least where I think some improvements can still be made to the Amazfit Helio Strap. However, I was surprised to see that in some of my testing it's really the best device out there. So let's get to it. Now I should mention a few things. First of all, there is no official bicep band yet for the Amazfit Helio Strap. So I use this sleeve right here, originally made for the Whoop Strap 4.0, that fits the Amazfit Helio Strap surprisingly well. Now at the same time I tested a second device on my wrist, and I tested both of them for several weeks, so we'll find out how good they actually are. Now as I understand it, Amazfit will release an official bicep band similar to how I'm wearing my Whoop strap right here, which should be more of a band and not this kind of sleeve, but I think the testing should be similar, though it could of course be that some firmware improvements are needed for wearing it on the biceps to be as optimal as possible. But so far, as you'll see in this video, wearing it on your biceps might actually be the way to go, even with the current firmware. Second, these tests were done on me, so these are true for my body. I think much of it will also translate to other people, but just be aware. And finally, I'll focus mostly on the heart rate tracking performance during different exercises and on the sleep stage tracking. And of course, there are some features that you might find more interesting that I didn't test, but I do think this video right here gives you a good overview of the power and the weaknesses of the Amazfit Helio Strap. So let's get to it, and let's start with the heart rate tracking performance, then we'll look at the sleep stage tracking, and finally we'll dive a little bit into the app. That will be more of a subjective part, but as you'll see, that's where I think some improvements can be made, in addition to one other thing that needs to be fixed. But let's get to it. But first, as always, it's still early in the morning, so let's start by making a coffee right here. And let's start by taking a look at one of the easiest exercises for most smartwatches and health trackers to track, and that's cycling indoors. And here you can see an overview for the heart rate performance of the Amazfit Helio Strap on my wrist. Now I'm starting with the one on my wrist since I expect most people will prefer to wear it there, though as you will see it might be better to wear it on your biceps. On the horizontal axis, we have a reference device, which is the Polar H10 ECG chest strap, which can generally record my heart rate very accurately. There have been some studies about it, you can find them in the description below. But overall, we know that wearing a chest strap is generally the most reliable way of measuring your heart rate. And on the vertical axis, we have the heart rate as tracked by the Amazfit Helio Strap. And if the two would agree perfectly, all points should be on or at least close to this blue line. And as you can see, this is generally the case. Almost all points are very close to this blue line. Only right here do we see a few points above it. And we can also see that the correlation, this R value up here, is very close to 1. So the best correlation a device can have is 1. So a correlation of 0.99 is just super close to that. So already wearing it on your wrist for cycling indoors seems to be doing really well. But what about wearing it on your biceps? Does that give us any improvements? Well, let's take a look. And here you can see the same plot, but now for wearing it on the biceps. And indeed, the points are even closer to the blue line. This is almost perfect, basically. The correlation is now 1.00, so rounded that would be 1. And that's really, really good. Only the best devices I've ever tested have gotten a correlation of 1. So it appears to be a bit easier to measure my heart rate on the biceps and on the wrist. And this is probably because this is a less bony surface. So here there's a lot of bone, making it a bit harder to detect those fluctuations in heart rate. And it's just a bit easier on this more fleshy surface here on the biceps. But let's take a look at some of the individual cycling sessions to see if there's still something going on or if it's really as perfect as it seems. So again, starting with the one on my wrist, we have one interval spinning session, and indeed the red line of the Amazfit Helio strap overlaps almost perfectly with the reference in blue-green. There are some moments of minor deviation, so for instance right here we see a small dip that wasn't fully detected, and also at the tops of the heart rate there's sometimes some deviation, but this is more or less perfect. And we see the same for this second example spinning session. Here in the lower heart rate range, it didn't fully detect that dip in my heart rate, but I would say it's almost perfect. But what if we take a look at this same spinning session, but now for the one on my biceps? And here we have that result. So it again is almost perfect, only right here not fully detecting this dip in my heart rate. But I tend to do quite extreme testing where I let my heart rate drop all of a sudden, and most devices struggle at least a little bit, and we can see that it still detected a heart rate of about 85 or so, where it actually dropped quite a lot back to more or less my resting heart rate. But otherwise it's basically looking perfect. And we see the same thing for this spinning session right here, but here it was able to fully detect a dip in my heart rate right here back to more or less my reference heart rate. So overall, for the one on my biceps here and the one on my wrist, basically perfect agreement. One could even imagine that the reference device had an issue right here detecting a too low heart rate, though I would expect the reference actually to be quite accurate right here. But overall, in the grand scheme of things, this is basically perfect agreement. So really good, especially for a wrist-worn device. Many devices struggle right here, but the Amazfit Helio strap does really well. But let's actually put these results into the context of many other devices I've tested in the past. And you can see that in this overview right here. So that correlation value we're looking at before is along the horizontal axis. And on the vertical axis, I ordered the watches from worst to best based on that correlation value. That means that the further to the top right the device is, the better its performance. And here I marked the one on my wrist in red. And if we take a look at the one on my biceps, we can see it does even a bit better, but it's very much towards the top right. But let's zoom in a bit because we cannot really read those labels right here. And that zoomed in view is displayed right here. So these are just the devices with a correlation of 0.9 or higher. And as you can see, the Amazfit Helio strap worn on my biceps right here, but also the one worn on my wrist right here, are among some of the best devices out there. They're close to, for instance, the Amazfit Bip 6 I tested and some Huawei devices. They're close to the performance of the Pixel Watch 3 and also some Apple Watches. And given that they're still in this narrow range, it's difficult to say with certainty that the Apple Watch is still doing better. Though I do suspect that the Apple Watch still has a slight but ever so slight edge over the Amazfit Helio strap when worn on my biceps. But overall, this is a more or less perfect result. So for cycling indoors or spinning, I can definitely recommend the Amazfit Helio strap if you want to track your heart rate. But let's make things a bit more difficult and let's take a look at the results for running outside. And here we have the results for the Amazfit Helio strap worn on my wrist. And this again looks really good. Most points are on or close to the blue line at least, and the correlation is pretty decent at 0.98. The only deviation we have is here in the lower heart rate range, but this was only for a few measurements. So overall, honestly looking really good. And if we look at the one on my biceps, this did even a lot better. So now almost all points are really on the blue line. So basically perfect agreement with a correlation of 1.00. So here we start to really see some improvements of the one worn on my biceps versus the one worn on my wrist. But let's take a look at the individual sessions to see how big the difference actually is. And let's start again with the one worn on my wrist. And indeed, the red line of the Amazfit Helio strap overlaps almost perfectly with the reference device. So nothing to complain about for this run. Let's take a look at another example run. This was more of an interval run. And also in this case, it was really able to track my heart rate accurately. Only here in the beginning, while it was still calibrating, I guess it struggled a little bit. But otherwise, almost perfect. Some small deviations right here in my higher heart rate range. But what about if I wear it on my biceps? Well, this looks even better. So it didn't have to calibrate here in the beginning. There's only one moment of deviation right here. but otherwise basically perfect agreement. And if you take a look at another run for the one on my biceps, this looks really good. Some minor deviation right here, but this is only by maybe 4 or 3 BPM, so nothing to complain about. Also right here, almost perfect agreement. And again, for this interval run, also perfect agreement. So both are doing really well, and especially the one worn on my biceps. So it might actually be worth it to wait for Amazfit to release the biceps band. However, let's first put these results into the context of many of the other devices I've tested in the past. And you can see those results right here. So again, the further to the top right, the better the agreement with the reference device. With the Amazfit Helio strap worn on my wrist marked here in red. And we can make a similar plot, but now for the one on my biceps, which is marked in red right here. And this is actually the best performer out of any device I've ever tested. But it's basically doing the same as, for instance, the Mi Band 10, the Apple Watch, and the Huawei Band 9. So running appears to be easy for some devices, especially Apple Watches, some Huawei devices. Also, the Whoop MG worn on my biceps did really well for this. So wearing it on your biceps definitely appears to be an advantage here. But the Amazfit Helio strap just does really well. But let's zoom in a little bit so we can read those labels better. And we have that zoomed in view right here. So these are just the devices with a correlation of 0.9 or higher. And some of the best devices out there, as I said, include Apple Watches. But already the Amazfit T-Rex 3 did rather well. And it's not doing that differently from the Amazfit Helio strap worn on my wrist. And both have the same sensor, so it makes some sense. Though as we saw before, having the same sensor doesn't always mean the same performance. As I mentioned, there's also some Huawei devices like the Huawei Watch Fit and the Huawei Band, but also the Mi Band and the Whoop MG worn on my biceps. Any of these will be good enough for running outside, but so far I'm really impressed with the Amazfit Helio strap. But let's now make things a lot more difficult and let's take a look at the results for cycling outside. But before looking at those results, if you're a runner or just getting into running and you want help making the best running plans, maybe for an upcoming 10K, for a half marathon or even a marathon, or maybe you're just looking to get into running and you want some help making running plans and want live guidance during your runs, I recommend the Runner app, which is the personal app I use as my running coach, which has been able to get me into running after many years of just being a cyclist. If you want the best deal possible on Runner, check out the discount link up here or down here. Or if you want to track your glucose levels and find out which foods cause big glucose spikes and dips affecting your energy levels, I recommend the Levels app, the personal app I use for tracking my food, but also my glucose levels with continuous glucose monitors. If you want to support the channel and get the best deals possible, check out the link up here or down here. Or if you want to support the channel in some other way and help me keep making these videos while keeping it sustainable next to my full-time job as a scientist, you can like this video, subscribe to the channel, and also become a YouTube member, which gives you early access to my videos. Thank you so much for considering this, and back to the testing. And here we have the results for the Helio strap worn on my wrist, and this is where we can see performance degrade at least a little bit. The correlation is now quite a bit lower at 0.9, and there are some points, especially here below the blue line, indicating that in some moments the Amazfit Helio strap on my wrist detected a too low heart rate. So this isn't quite as good as what we saw for running and cycling indoors, but what about the one on my biceps? Well, this is again a lot better. The correlation is still super high at 0.99, and it's basically showing a perfect correlation. Yes, there's a little bit of deviation right here with a few points below the blue line, but this would definitely be good enough for me. So here we have a true advantage of the one on my biceps over the one on my wrist. But let's take a look at some individual bike rides to see how big the difference actually is. So here we have a first example bike ride for the one on my wrist. And you can see it's generally quite good, though there are some moments like right here where it lost my heart rate for a bit, and like right here in the beginning where it detected a too low heart rate. And if we take the exact same session, but now for the one worn on my biceps, we can see that the agreement is just almost perfect for the one on my biceps. So we see quite a big difference between this versus this, I would say. Now for a second example session right here for the one worn on my wrist, we again see some deviation, though nothing terrible. It especially detects a too low heart rate sometimes here near the end, for instance. And if we take a look at the same one, but now for the one on my biceps, it's again almost perfect. So here we start to see big differences between the two. But what about how this compares to the competition? Well, there we can also see how big the difference actually is. So here's the one worn on my wrist marked in red, where the farther to the top right, the better its agreement with the reference device. And you can see that compared to the competition, it's sort of in the second or third tier of devices. It's definitely not terrible, but we could see some deviations. And if we zoom in a bit, we can see it's doing about as well as, for instance, the Whoop MG, the Polar Vantage M3, some Huawei devices, the Amazfit Bip 6 again, so a similar sensor, so similar performance potentially, but it's not doing quite as well as different Apple Watches and also different Huawei devices and the Pixel Watch 3. So if you want a wrist-worn device, there is still better devices out there. But as you might have noticed, if we make the same plot, but now for the one on my biceps, we can see that this is the best performer out of any device I've ever tested. So it's really doing quite well. So different Apple Watches are doing about as well as the Amazfit Helio Strap, but only if worn on the biceps. So Apple devices worn on the wrist are definitely doing better than the Amazfit Helio Strap. However, you cannot really wear Apple Watches on your biceps. And the Amazfit Helio Strap, which at least in the future you should be able to wear on your biceps, is doing about as well as these Apple Watches. And as you know, on Android, the Pixel Watch 3 is probably your best option. And this is doing maybe a little bit worse than the Amazfit Helio Strap worn on your biceps. All three of these brands, so Apple, the Pixel Watch 3 and the Amazfit Helio Strap worn on your biceps, are just good enough. I don't think you would notice any significant difference in performance. But moving the Helio Strap from your biceps to your wrist would definitely lower performance. But let's close off with the hardest exercise for a device to track weightlifting. And here we have the results for weightlifting with the Amazfit Helio Strap on my wrist. And this looks okay, though it definitely shows the expected patterns of mistakes, where in the higher heart rate range there's quite a few points below the blue line, indicating that the moment I do a set of exercises and my heart rate increases, but there's also a lot of tension on my wrist, the Amazfit Helio Strap isn't really able to keep up with tracking my heart rate and detects a too low heart rate. That's also the reason why the correlation is quite a bit lower now at 0.89, probably too low to be good enough. But what about the one worn on my biceps? Well, those results are again a lot better. We have a correlation of 0.98, so really good, with most points on or close to the blue line, though in the really high heart rate range the points are below the blue line still, indicating that sometimes still at the peaks of my heart rate, the Amazfit Helio Strap detected a too low heart rate. But let's take a look at those sessions themselves, because that will show us how bad the problems are. So here we have one example weightlifting session for the one worn on my wrist, where each time I do a set of exercises, my heart rate increases quite a bit, as you can see by the blue lines. And the red lines of the Amazfit Helio Strap are clearly not detecting those peaks. So the one worn on my wrist, at least based on this session, wouldn't be good enough. And we see more or less the same for this second example. So wearing it on your wrist is definitely not good enough for tracking my heart rate during weightlifting. But what about the one worn on my biceps? Well, this looks a lot better. Right here you can see that basically all peaks were detected quite accurately. Now for this session, some peaks were detected like here in the beginning, but still some are missed, especially here in the middle. This session was again quite good. Also, this session doesn't look too bad, though here in the middle some of the peaks were missed. And also this session doesn't look too bad. So overall, maybe good enough actually. Some peaks will still be missed, but it seems like in many occasions it does pick up on the peaks in your heart rate, but only when worn on the biceps. Let's put these results in the context of many of the other devices I've tested before. And those results are right here, where again, the further to the top right, the better the agreement with the reference device, with the one worn on my biceps marked in red. And you can see it's definitely amongst the top performers. But let's zoom in a little bit so we can read those labels better. So these are just the devices with a correlation of 0.8 or higher, so the best performing devices. And the one worn on my biceps did really well. Only the Apple Watch still outperforms it. But otherwise, it's really quite okay, I would say. Most devices are doing quite a lot worse. Also, the Whoop strap worn on my biceps isn't doing quite as well. Now, as we saw before, if I wear it on my wrist instead, the performance is quite a bit worse. So it's doing about the same as the Amazfit Bip 6, for instance. Also, the Amazfit T-Rex 3 is performing about the same. Again, same sensor, similar performance when worn on my wrist. So wearing it on my biceps definitely has some advantages. So it's a bit surprising Amazfit didn't immediately release also a bicep band, since for the Whoop strap this is quite popular. So these are the results for heart rate tracking, but what about some of the other features of the Amazfit Helio strap? So those are the results for the heart rate tracking, but what about the sleep tracking and specifically the sleep stage tracking? Now this is something that many devices try to do and also use in their metrics for like your sleep score and your sleep performance in the morning. But if they use, for instance, a total amount of deep sleep, the sleep stage tracking, so deep sleep, light sleep, REM sleep, should also be quite accurate. Now the way we're gonna do it is by comparing the sleep stage tracking of the Amazfit Helio Band to the Z-Max EEG device, which can actually measure my brain waves and has been specifically designed for sleep stage tracking. Now it's not perfect, but definitely good enough to get a general impression of the sleep stage tracking performance of the Amazfit Helio strap. Now at first I wanted to use both the data for the one on my biceps and the one on my wrist. The problem is that I cannot really get to the data for the one on my wrist. I've been trying to export it from Apple Health for about 2 hours or so. You can see it's still doing it right here. I've done the same yesterday and it just appears to be stuck at the exporting phase. Now I already looked at the results for the one on my biceps and they're pretty clear and also not that dissimilar from previous testing. So we're gonna stick with that data for the sleep stage tracking because I just cannot get to that other data for now. If I ever do retesting in the future, we'll also take a look at some of the data for the one on my wrist, but I think the results are pretty clear. So let's head back to my computer and let's take a look at those results. And here we have those sleep stage tracking results, with the sleep stages according to the reference device on top and those according to the Amazfit Helio strap on my biceps on the left. Now each column here sums to 100%, meaning that we can see what percentage of the sleep stages according to the reference device was predicted as each sleep stage by the Amazfit Helio strap. And if they would agree perfectly, all values on this yellow diagonal right here should be 100%. Now, as you can see, they're not 100%. First of all, deep sleep agreement is about 50% or so, and about the same amount of what was detected as deep sleep by the reference device was detected as light sleep instead by the Amazfit Helio strap. Light sleep agreement is pretty decent at about 75%, and most confusion in this case was with deep sleep, and REM sleep agreement really isn't very good at about 36%. Much more of it, almost double, was predicted as being light sleep instead. So REM sleep appears to be the sleep stage that the Amazfit Helio strap struggles with most. Now we're not going to focus on awake time because the reference device detects a lot of awake time that wasn't really awake time. But the other sleep stages are generally detected quite reliably. So overall, this indicates to me that in terms of sleep stage tracking, the Amazfit Helio strap really isn't that good yet. And it somehow doesn't seem that dissimilar from some of the other devices from Amazfit. And I can actually prove that to you by putting these results into the context of many other devices I've tested in the past. And you can see that in this overview right here. So the average agreement over the individual sleep stages are along the horizontal axis, and the agreement of the worst out of all sleep stages is along the vertical axis. That basically means that the better the agreement with the reference device, the more to the top right the device is. And the colors indicate different reference devices. Now, if a device was tested against the reference device we used in this video, it's marked in green. But where can we find the Amazfit Helio strap? Well, it is right here. So it's really not doing that great. It's not amongst the absolute worst devices, which tend to be some older Huawei devices or some Mi Band devices, but it's definitely not amongst the best performers. It's actually quite close to, for instance, the Amazfit T-Rex 3, so another Amazfit device, and also not that far from the Amazfit Bip 6, the Amazfit Bip U, and also, for instance, the Amazfit Balance right here. Now, usually for sleep stage tracking, the hardware is less important than the software. Now, the software or the algorithm is actually the thing that translates the raw measurements into sleep stages. So it measures things like your movement, your heart rate variability, maybe your temperature, even the time of night is probably considered. All these things are somehow transformed into your sleep stages. And during the night, it's actually quite easy for almost any device out there to measure things like your heart rate and your movement. Because you're moving so little and the heart rate is quite low, it's quite easy to measure. So it's not so much the hardware, but really developed algorithms that set devices apart. And in order to create a good algorithm, you need to spend a lot of money collecting reference data with both a proper sleep stage tracker that measures your brain waves, your eye movements, your muscle movements, and with the devices themselves. And probably Amazfit didn't spend a lot of money yet creating a good sleep stage tracking algorithm. And there are quite a few devices out there that are better. And I would say there are 6 brands that are doing best. So let's take a look at those. So the 4 brands I've tested that did the absolute best in my testing are the 8 Sleep Pod, the Apple Watch, the Sleep 2 app, and the Oura Ring. Those are sort of the 4 top devices in my testing at least. Now the 8 Sleep Pod is a thing that goes around your mattress and actively cools and heats each side of the bed. It's my favorite sleep improvement device because especially during summer I just overheat and I can actually control the temperature of my bed without requiring AC because we don't really have that in Europe, and it's actually more energy efficient to cool each side of the bed. And it can actually independently do so for each side. So if you have a partner that sleeps hotter or colder than you can set each side of the bed independently. And I really love it, but it is also super expensive. So only get it if you can really afford it. If you want the best deal possible, use my affiliate link up here or down here, and you'll be supporting the channel at the same time. And in my testing, it's actually also one of the better sleep stage trackers out there. So without wearing anything on your body, it can track your sleep stages, your heart rate, your breathing rate, and it's really good at this. The Apple Watch is also one of the best sleep trackers out there. The Oura Ring is also quite good, and there's the Sleep 2 or Nuco app. So all these 4 brands are my main recommendations for sleep stage tracking. Now in the second tier of devices, we have different Fitbit and Google devices. So Google owns Fitbit, so you get the same sleep stage tracking. And the Whoop strap, which would be a direct competitor to the Amazfit Helio strap. So I think Whoop has definitely invested more money in getting good sleep stage tracking than Amazfit. So if you want sleep stage tracking, the Whoop strap is definitely still the better choice over Amazfit. So as we saw, the heart rate tracking is probably a bit better on Amazfit. So it really depends on your focus right there. And Whoop, of course, requires a subscription, so that's not for everyone. But overall, based on this, I would say that the sleep stage tracking is at least not very good on the Amazfit Helio strap. Now, I do have to say, I also have an affiliate link for Whoop up here or down here, which gives you the best deal possible. That means that theoretically, I could have a financial incentive to tell you that the Whoop strap is better than the Amazfit Helio strap. But as you saw, I present the raw data as it is there. And for heart rate tracking, I do have the feeling that the Helio strap is better. So these are the results. If you decide to get the Amazfit Helio strap, you can also use my Amazon affiliate link. So you can support the channel either way. And I always present the data in an unbiased way. I don't filter it unless I know something is wrong with either the reference or the device. I try to just give you the data as is and be as unbiased as possible. So that's all the objective testing I've done with the Amazfit Helio strap. But what about my subjective experience? Do I find the experience the same or better or worse than the Whoop strap? And would my daily decision making be different if I had a Whoop strap or an Amazfit Helio strap? Well, I have some things to say about that, but let's first summarize my objective testing. So in terms of heart rate tracking, I definitely think, based on my testing at least, that the Amazfit Helio strap might be even a bit better than the Whoop strap. Especially one on the biceps, I really love that performance. There's only a few devices that have potentially performed a bit better, and that's for instance the Apple Watch or the Pixel Watch, especially when worn on the wrist. But given that you quite easily could wear the Amazfit Helio strap on your biceps for a long time if they release a proper biceps band, then this is definitely a device I can recommend for heart rate tracking. Even on the wrist it's not bad, but if they ever release a biceps band, that could be a game changer for many of you. The sleep stage tracking isn't that great. It appears to be about the same as you've seen for many Amazfit devices. So I just wouldn't rely on the sleep stages that it provides, but probably your total time in bed and your total time asleep even will be pretty perfectly okay, and you can still make plenty of decisions based on that. And that brings me to my subjective experience. So of course the Amazfit Helio Strap comes with an app because there's no interface on the actual device itself. And it does seem that Amazfit has tried to make it look a bit like the Whoop Strap app. So you have 4 tabs right here. So there's an overview section, there's also a bio chart and a sleep and exertion section. Now in the overview you get things like your resting heart rate during the night, your heart rate variability, sleep duration, deep sleep percentage, but I wouldn't really trust that part, sleep apnea risk, skin temperature, exercise load and training status. So sort of an overview of all your metrics. And this is not that dissimilar from the Whoop Strap and especially the previous version of the Whoop Strap app. Wait, let me grab my other phone where I have my Whoop Strap connected to.
Eventually.
Okay, the data is still exporting from my Apple Health app, so I'm just gonna cancel that because this is taking forever. So the Whoop Strap app does look a bit different now, so it doesn't have the exact same tabs, but you do get a general overview as well of your sleep, recovery and strain, so somewhat similar to the Amazfit app. And I do feel like Amazfit has tried to copy some things. Like for instance here I have my health span update of the Whoop Strap, where you can see this sort of check mark on the top where it gives you an update, and the Amazfit app does something similar. Let me see if I still have it open. So for instance right here we have a deep sleep insight with a similar question mark on top. So it really feels like Amazfit tries to give you a similar experience as the Whoop app. Still overall, I personally like the Whoop Strap a little bit better. It just gives me a slightly better feel for my data and an easier overview. I do like these new metrics like your biological age, your health span, these kinds of things. And I actually do use them on a daily basis. And it's sort of a gamified experience that works quite well, at least for me, helping me to stay on track with trying to live a healthy life. But I do not get obsessed with these kind of things. So if you're very obsessive, this might actually be a negative experience. So for instance, Whoop has a health span right here, where I'm about 10 years younger in biological age compared to chronological age. Of course, this is very much unscientific or unproven, but it's interesting, and the way they try to motivate you to live a bit healthier is by advising you to improve certain things, where there's like half scientific evidence that these are very important or not. So overall, with the better sleep stage tracking and the better app, if I could choose, all things being equal in terms of price as well, I would still slightly prefer the Whoop Strap app over the Amazfit app. However, the difference isn't huge at the moment, and the fact that you likely get slightly better heart rate tracking and there's no subscription fee, I can definitely understand getting the Amazfit Helio Strap as well. And if you're either more of a casual user or you care less about the sleep stage tracking and that sort of health aspect of things, then the Amazfit Helio Strap might actually be the better option, because Whoop is also doing some things that I don't like as much. One thing is that Whoop now has several subscription tiers, with the more expensive tiers giving you more insights like your health span and things like this. And if you don't take this most expensive tier, they actually gray out the sections of the things that you're not having access to, constantly giving you sort of a FOMO of not having that more expensive one. I know this is a business tactic and this probably works well in terms of getting people to upgrade. I just don't like that you continuously have to remind people that they're not paying for the most expensive thing and that they're missing out. So these kind of business practices I personally think are not so nice, because people are already paying for something and then you're continuously reminding them that they don't get the most expensive option. So to summarize, who should get the Whoop Strap? Who should get the Amazfit Helio Strap? And should you get it at all? Well, I think those people purely focused on heart rate tracking during exercises are served very well by the Amazfit Helio Strap. It just gives good performance even when worn on the wrist, but especially when worn on the biceps. So if you want to focus on that, maybe wait until Amazfit releases that biceps band. But if you're mostly focused on health tracking, so sleep stages, your general aging, and you want a better app experience, then you might be better served with the Whoop Strap. I would say that for me personally, Whoop is still the device I use for overall tracking of everything. I use it myself on a daily basis for a combination of sports, health, sleep, and a good app. So it's still the best overall package, but Amazfit, at least on me, is definitely doing better in terms of heart rate tracking. So to save yourself quite a bit of money in the long run, the Helio Strap is definitely a good alternative, and I do like what Amazfit has made here. Now, of course, the Whoop strap and the Amazfit Helio band aren't the only options out there. I think many people actually do prefer having an interface like for instance this Garmin watch right here. So for those of you not wanting to take your phone with you on different workouts, I would definitely not recommend either of these straps, and you should just get a watch that has built-in GPS where you can start your exercises from the device itself. Now Garmin is one of my favorite devices for GPS tracking, so if that is your focus, I can definitely recommend different Garmin and also Coros devices. If you just want sleep stage tracking and good overall health tracking, both the Oura Ring and the 8 Sleep Pod are good options, with the 8 Sleep Pod also potentially providing better sleep quality, which is definitely the case for me, especially on those hot summer days. But it is super expensive, so it's not for everyone. Again, only get devices you can really afford. Don't buy them on credit, at least that's my opinion. You shouldn't buy too many or anything at all on credit. Just buy it if you can actually afford it. And if you purely want sleep stage tracking and you don't want to spend a lot of money, probably different Fitbit devices are a good option because they're quite cheap. Even if you get an older Fitbit Charge 4 or 5, there's actually already the generation 6, but those older generations, even my old Fitbit Charge 2, give you the same sleep stage tracking performance. So if this is your only focus, cheaper devices are an option. Though be forewarned, Fitbit devices tend to break a lot. The production quality just isn't very good. So overall, I'm pleasantly surprised with the Amazfit Helio strap. It's definitely a pretty good tracker and definitely an option for many of you out there, though it really depends on your personal goals. Now, if you do decide to get the Amazfit Helio strap, the Whoop strap, an 8 Sleep Pod, an Oura Ring, another device, or anything at all on Amazon for that matter, and you want to get the best deal possible, use my affiliate links up here or down here, and you'll be supporting the channel at the same time. Now, given that you watched this whole video on the Amazfit Helio strap, check out this video on the new Whoop strap, or this video on the best sleep stage trackers out there.